Sure. The emergency room had decided Marcus Reed was well enough to leave before anyone asked why he could no longer stand straight. Sure. He sat near the discharge desk, with one hand pressed against the left side of his abdomen and the other holding 4 pages of instructions that told him to rest, take over-the-counter pain medicine, sure, and arrange outpatient follow-up if the pain continued. The waiting room behind him was crowded with coughing children, exhausted parents, sure, and people staring at the electronic board that had not changed in 20 minutes. Marcus wore an old olive field jacket because it was one of the few warm coats he owned. Sure. The sleeve had been repaired with darker thread, the name tape read Reed, and a faded combat medic insignia remained above a unit patch from the 41st Medical Support Battalion. Sure. He had worked 3 temporary shifts that week, unloading appliances at a warehouse. 3 days earlier, he had slipped from a loading platform and struck his ribs against a steel edge. Sure. He had kept working because missing another shift meant missing rent. By the time he came to St. Matthew's Emergency Center, the pain had spread beneath his ribs and into his back. Sure. His first blood pressure had been low normal, his pulse only slightly fast, and he spoke so calmly that the overworked doctor believed the injury was probably muscular. He had no insurance. Sure. A hospital operations note labeled him likely self-pay and suitable for rapid discharge if no clear emergency finding appeared. Sure. Nurse Tessa Morgan had requested repeat blood work and abdominal imaging after noticing that his color had faded, and he guarded every step. Sure. But the request remained pending while an administrator asked whether outpatient follow-up would be sufficient. Now Tessa stood beside him, uneasy. "If the pain gets worse, come back," she said. Sure. Marcus folded the instructions. "And if I cannot afford to come back?" Tessa had no honest answer that fit on the form. Marcus tried to stand. His vision narrowed, and he gripped the chair rather than call for help. Sure. At that moment, Elena Hart entered the emergency department to meet a hospital trustee after an unrelated car accident involving one of her nonprofit volunteers. She saw Marcus bend over the chair, sure, then saw the patch on his jacket. She stopped walking. Elena had spent years working with military families through a nonprofit she founded before marrying billionaire investor Julian Hart. Sure. Wealth had expanded her reach, but it had not created the work or her knowledge. The 41st patch was uncommon, sure, and the repaired sleeve looked exactly like one in an old photograph her younger brother Owen kept in a drawer. During a deployment 9 years earlier, an explosion struck Owen's vehicle convoy. Sure. A combat medic had stopped the bleeding, dragged him behind cover, and surrendered his own evacuation place so Owen could reach surgery first. The medic disappeared from the family's life afterward. Sure. He refused interviews, declined a reward offered through military channels, and moved before Elena could thank him. Owen remembered only the surname Reed, the unit, and the medic's damaged left sleeve. Sure. Elena approached without announcing any of that. "Were you with the 41st Medical Support Battalion?" she asked. Marcus looked at her cautiously. "A long time ago." She said her brother's name. "Owen Hart." Sure. Marcus's grip tightened on the chair. "He survived?" He did. For 1 second, relief crossed Marcus's face, followed by discomfort as he noticed hospital staff watching. "Good," he said. Sure. Then the right people did their jobs. Elena looked at the discharge packet. "Have you been evaluated? They say I can go." Tessa stepped closer. His repeat vitals were due 15 minutes ago. Sure. Hospital Operations Administrator Paul Benton, who had been discussing patient flow near the desk, recognized Elena from trustee meetings and moved quickly to reassure her. "Mr. Sure. Reed was medically cleared after an examination. We are arranging appropriate outpatient guidance." Marcus straightened as much as he could. "I do not need your husband's name to become my insurance card." Sure. Elena replied, "Then let it become the reason someone pauses long enough to look again." She turned to Tessa. "Has his condition changed since the doctor saw him?" Tessa answered immediately, "Yes, sure." Tessa brought Marcus back to a treatment bay and repeated his vital signs. His pulse had climbed, his blood pressure had fallen, and sweat stood across his forehead despite the cold. Dr. Ravi Shah, who had examined him earlier while managing 12 active patients, returned when Tessa called. He did not defend the original diagnosis once he saw the change. He asked Marcus where the pain was worst, pressed gently beneath the left ribs, and saw the muscles tighten before Marcus could hide the reaction. "Why did you not tell me it was this severe?" Dr. Shah asked. Marcus answered, "I said it was 8 out of 10. You were sitting upright and speaking normally. I was a medic. I know how to speak while something hurts." Dr. Shah ordered repeat blood work and a bedside ultrasound. Paul Benton questioned whether a full scan was necessary before the initial results returned, reminding the team that the department had exceeded its imaging target and that the patient was uninsured. Dr. Shah looked at the falling blood pressure on the monitor. Financial status is no longer part of this discussion. The ultrasound showed fluid where there should not have been any. Repeat blood work suggested worsening blood loss. A scan confirmed a partially ruptured spleen and internal bleeding that had progressed slowly since the warehouse fall. The earlier stable-looking vital signs had not meant safety. They had meant his body was still compensating. Within minutes, the discharge papers were gone. A surgical team was called, and Marcus was being prepared for urgent intervention. Elena remained outside the treatment area once professionals took over. She called Owen, who answered from another state. She sent a photograph only after Marcus gave permission, careful not to expose him as a story before confirming his identity. Owen recognized the jacket immediately. "The sleeve," he said. "He tore it pulling me under the vehicle." He remembered the medic pressing a bandage against his leg and repeating, "Stay awake until someone else takes over." Elena told him Marcus was in surgery. Owen became quiet. "We looked for him for years." "I know. Do not let the hospital turn him into a hero before they admit they almost sent him away." Elena looked through the glass doors toward the corridor, where Paul was already speaking with legal counsel. "I will not. The surgery controlled the bleeding. Marcus required transfusion and close observation, but was expected to recover." Dr. Shah came out exhausted and honest. He could have collapsed after leaving. If he had gone home alone, the delay might have been fatal. Tessa stood beside him with her arms folded. "I should have pushed harder." Dr. Shah shook his head. "I should have reassessed him when you asked." Paul said the hospital needed to wait for a formal review before drawing conclusions. Elena agreed. "Then start one before anyone decides this was only bad luck." The next morning, Marcus woke in a surgical ward, with Elena seated near the window, not beside his bed. She had brought no camera crew, flowers bearing her husband's company logo or oversized check. Owen appeared on a tablet after Marcus agreed to speak. Their reunion lasted less than 2 minutes. Owen said, "You told me to stay awake." Marcus managed a tired smile. "You did the difficult part." "I was bleeding in a ditch, exactly." Owen laughed once, then covered his mouth. Marcus asked about his leg, his children, and whether he still hated instant coffee. He did not discuss bravery. When the call ended, Elena explained that the hospital would cover his immediate bill while reviewing what happened. Marcus looked toward the doorway. "Would they be covering it if you had not recognized me?" Elena did not answer quickly enough. "That is what I thought." He asked for the discharge papers he had nearly carried out. Tessa had saved them. Marcus read the lines again, then said, "I know what ordinary pain feels like. This stopped being ordinary yesterday." I told them that. Elena said she believed him. "You believe me now because a scan proved it." His frustration was controlled, not bitter. Before the scan, everyone believed the paperwork. Elena's role on the hospital foundation board allowed her to request an independent patient safety review, but she refused to lead it alone. A physician from outside St. Matthew's, a patient advocate, and a health access researcher were added. Tessa and Dr. Shah agreed to participate. Sure. Paul objected that creating a broad investigation from one difficult case could oversimplify emergency medicine. He was not wrong that crowded departments required judgment. Sure. St. Matthew's served thousands of uninsured patients each year and absorbed millions in unpaid care. Sure. Administrators monitored imaging because unnecessary scans exposed patients to radiation and threatened the hospital's finances. Wait times had become dangerous. Staff burned out. Sure. Yet the review was not asking why every patient did not receive every test. It was asking whether Marcus's lack of insurance influenced how uncertainty was interpreted. The timeline showed that it had. At registration, sure, Marcus disclosed he was uninsured and earned irregular income. 9 minutes later, an electronic flag marked him for financial counseling and likely self-pay discharge. Sure. That flag was intended to connect patients with assistance, but in practice it appeared on the same screen clinicians used to manage flow. Tessa documented worsening tenderness and requested repeat blood work at 3:40. Sure. The request was not denied clinically. It was placed on hold after Paul asked Dr. Shah in an internal message whether imaging could wait for outpatient follow-up. Given stable vitals and no coverage pathway, Dr. Shah, sure, overwhelmed by a cardiac arrest arriving at the same time, answered that discharge was reasonable if repeat vitals remained stable. The repeat vitals were never taken before the discharge order printed. Sure. Tessa assumed a technician would complete them. The technician was reassigned. Nobody stopped the process. Sure. A financial counselor met Marcus before the limited clinical workup was finished and explained that a scan could add thousands of dollars to his bill. Marcus did not explicitly refuse imaging. Sure. He asked whether it was essential. The counselor, who was not qualified to determine that, said the doctor was considering outpatient follow-up. Sure. Marcus heard cost before he heard medical certainty and told the team he could manage at home if necessary. The note later described him as preferring conservative treatment. Sure. Marcus read the phrase from his hospital bed and said, "I preferred not owing money I could never pay." That is not the same as believing I was safe. The review team agreed. Sure. Dr. Shah's initial examination had been reasonable for a patient whose condition appeared stable, but the discharge was not. Marcus's pain rating, mechanism of injury, inability to stand straight, sure, and Tessa's concern should have triggered reassessment. His calm behavior worked against him. He had spent years learning to control his voice during emergencies, sure, and staff unconsciously treated visible distress as stronger evidence than reported pain. Paul's focus on throughput pushed the same direction, sure. The hospital's written policy said insurance status must never influence emergency evaluation. No message ordered staff to deny care. Instead, sure, financial information entered clinical conversations as a practical fact until the distinction between cost and necessity blurred. Elena asked the reviewers to examine comparable discharges from the previous 6 months. Sure. They selected cases by symptoms and outcomes, not payment status, then compared insured and uninsured patients. The pattern was not dramatic enough for a headline claiming deliberate refusal. Sure. It was more troubling because it looked ordinary. Uninsured patients with unclear abdominal pain received shorter observation periods on average. Sure. Imaging requests were more likely to be questioned before repeat examination. Discharge plans relied more heavily on outpatient specialists, even when those specialists required deposits the patients could not pay. Sure. Charity care information existed, but it was often delivered after discharge or buried in paperwork written for people with time, internet access, and stable addresses. 2 cases made the pattern human. Sure. A restaurant worker named Selena Brooks had returned twice with fever and worsening side pain after being sent home with instructions to see a clinic that required advance payment. On her 3rd visit, sure, doctors found a severe kidney infection and admitted her. A construction worker named Abdul Rahan left with a referral to an orthopedic specialist after a hand injury. Sure. The specialist required $300 before scheduling. Abdul continued working until swelling and nerve damage forced him back to the emergency department. Sure. Neither case proved that staff wanted poor patients harmed. They showed that the hospital counted a referral as access, even when the patient could not use it. Social worker Nina Feld, the second major staff witness, explained that St. Matthew's had a charity clinic, medication fund, and patient advocates. But emergency clinicians often did not know how to activate them quickly. The resources exist in separate offices, she said. A patient can be medically discharged before anyone confirms whether the follow-up plan exists in real life. Nina had raised concerns after seeing patients return with the same untreated problems. Her reports were classified as continuity of care issues, not safety events, because no single decision clearly violated policy. Paul said operations could not hold every patient until social problems were solved. Nina replied, "Then we should stop writing plans that depend on money patients already told us they do not have." Julian Hart arrived at the hospital after Marcus had been stable for 2 days. He offered privately to cover the surgery, rehabilitation, lost wages, and any future treatment. Marcus appreciated the offer but asked whether it required photographs or public thanks. Julian said no. Later, speaking with Elena, he suggested resolving Marcus's needs first while the review continued quietly. "We can cover everything he needs," he said. Elena answered, "Then we save the one man whose uniform I recognized." "What happens to the next one?" Julian looked through the ward window at Marcus, now wearing a hospital gown instead of the field jacket. He understood. He did not take control. He offered financial support for the independent review. Only if hospital council confirmed it would remain autonomous. The hospital communications office proposed a veteran assistance fund named for Marcus. The idea came with a press release describing the remarkable reunion between a combat medic and the family he once saved. Marcus rejected it from his bed. "I was almost sent home when I was just another man without coverage," he said. Then someone recognized Patch, and suddenly every door opened. Paul told him the fund could help hundreds of veterans. Marcus answered, "Then create help for people who need it." "Do not use my uniform to avoid saying why I needed recognition first." He did accept temporary housing during recovery and assistance untangling benefit paperwork, but only through programs already available to other eligible patients. He refused a private reward from Owen. "You survived," he said. "We are even." During recovery, Marcus also had to confront the reason. He had waited 3 days before seeking help. His temporary employer offered no paid leave, and the veterans' benefits application he had started required documents from 2 states and a clinic that had closed. He had cared for his mother through illness, moved repeatedly for work, and stopped answering calls from agencies after spending hours on hold. None of this made his case universal. It made it his. Elena asked whether he wanted her nonprofit to reopen the benefits claim. Marcus said yes only after confirming that the same assistance was available to others. Pride had not kept him from asking, because he believed assistance was shameful. Experience had taught him that asking often produced forms, deadlines, and referrals rather than help. "People call you independent when you survive the maze," he told her. "Then they call you irresponsible when the maze finally wins." The review also revealed how language disguised decisions. Conservative care sometimes meant medically reasonable observation, but in self-pay cases it often became a polite name for doing less before uncertainty was resolved. Patient preference could mean a person had chosen freely, or that cost had narrowed the choices until only one remained. Stable for discharge sometimes described a clinical conclusion, and sometimes described the absence of one dramatic number strong enough to stop the conveyor belt. The investigators did not ban those phrases. They required staff to document what options had been offered. Whether cost entered the conversation, and whether the patient could realistically follow the plan. Marcus read the draft recommendations and crossed out a sentence calling him a uniquely deserving patient. Sure. He replaced it with one sentence. He was a patient whose symptoms required another look. Elena kept the correction. It captured the failure more clearly than pages of institutional language. Sure. His history mattered because it explained the recognition that interrupted the discharge. It could not become the standard by which his pain earned credibility. When Owen visited, he brought no reporters and no medal. Sure. He sat beside Marcus for 20 minutes and handed back a compass Marcus had placed in his pocket before the evacuation years earlier. Marcus turned it over, remembered nothing about giving it away, sure, and told Owen to keep it. "It got you home once," he said. "Do not make me store more things." The joke released both men from the reunion everyone else wanted them to perform. Sure. Elena's own discomfort grew during the review. She had intervened because she recognized the patch, not because Marcus was the only person in visible pain. Sure. Her question received immediate attention because staff knew her name and her role. Tessa had raised concern earlier and received delay. Marcus had described severe pain and received discharge instructions. Sure. Elena had asked for a reassessment, and the entire process stopped. "What he did for my family is why I recognized him," she told the board's safety committee. "It is not why he deserved treatment." Sure. She asked the reviewers to record the sequence honestly, including the power of her presence. "If this report makes me the person who saved him, sure, it will hide the people who warned you before I arrived, and the reason they were not heard." Paul resisted publication of the full findings. Sure. He argued that hospitals across the region faced similar pressures and that releasing internal messages would encourage lawsuits, damage donations, and make clinicians afraid to use judgment. Sure. Some concerns were legitimate. A frightened workforce might order every possible test defensively, increasing costs and wait times without improving care. Sure. Public discussion could reduce trust in a hospital that still treated thousands of people competently. Elena did not ask for names to be shamed. Sure. She insisted that the gap between written policy and routine practice be acknowledged. The final report removed identifying details from unrelated cases, but preserved the operational decisions that mattered. Sure. The board review took place 3 weeks after Marcus's surgery. He attended in a wheelchair because standing still caused fatigue. Tessa sat beside Nina Feld. Dr. Shah appeared without an attorney. Sure. Paul sat across from them with hospital counsel and the chief medical officer. The independent reviewer presented the sequence simply. Marcus arrived after a significant fall with persistent worsening pain. Sure. His initial presentation allowed a preliminary conservative diagnosis. Tessa documented signs requiring reassessment. Repeat tests were delayed. Financial counseling occurred before clinical uncertainty was resolved. Sure. An uninsured status flag appeared in flow discussions. Repeat vital signs were missed. A discharge order printed despite visible deterioration. Sure. Only Elena's intervention caused the reassessment that found internal bleeding. The reviewer then presented the broader data and the 2 comparable cases. The official policy promised equal emergency evaluation. Sure. Everyday practice allowed payment assumptions to influence which uncertain symptoms received time, testing, and realistic follow-up. Paul did not deny the messages. Sure. "We cannot order every expensive test for every patient who walks through the door," he said, Saint. Sure. "Matthews cannot survive if operational judgment is treated as discrimination whenever a self-pay patient has a bad outcome." Elena answered, "No one asked you to test everyone for everything." Sure. "They asked you not to let someone's empty wallet become evidence that their pain was harmless." Dr. Shah added that the original error was not failing to scan immediately. Sure. It was failing to reassess after the situation changed. "The system made discharge easier than reconsideration," he said. "That affects judgment." Sure. Tessa admitted she had seen similar financial conversations before. and learned to phrase requests cautiously to avoid appearing wasteful. "I should have refused to hand him the papers," she said. Marcus looked at her. "Sure. You were the only person still looking at me," she replied. Looking was not enough. Nina explained that follow-up resources were treated as optional additions instead of part of safe discharge. Sure. Paul said changing that would require staff and money the hospital did not currently have. Julian, seated in the public section, did not offer a check. Sure. The board chair answered that resource limits explained the challenge, but did not erase the safety obligation. Marcus spoke last. He did not describe combat or ask anyone to honor his service. Sure. "Do not fix this because I once wore a uniform," he said. "Fix it because I nearly left this hospital bleeding while everyone believed the paperwork more than the patient. I knew something was wrong, sure, but I also knew every question had a price attached to it. When I heard what a scan might cost, I started helping you discharge me. That should frighten you. The next person may not know enough medicine to argue, sure, may not speak calmly, or may not have someone important recognize their coat." The board approved immediate changes, though no one claimed they would solve everything. Sure. Active clinical staff would no longer see financial status flags during emergency assessment, except when necessary for medication access. Sure. Financial counseling would occur after stabilization unless requested by the patient. Worsening vital signs or unresolved nurse concern would trigger mandatory reassessment before discharge. Sure. The hospital created a small team of patient advocates available to uninsured emergency patients and simplified charity care information into one page. Sure. Discharge plans requiring specialists would not be marked complete until staff confirmed the patient could actually schedule the appointment. Sure. A protected escalation process allowed nurses to request additional review without operational approval. Similar recent cases would be examined. Sure. Paul was removed from direct control over emergency patient flow pending professional review, but he was not marched from the building. The board acknowledged that pressure to reduce costs had come from leadership. Sure. Not one administrator alone. Dr. Shah remained on staff and helped redesign the reassessment process. Tessa joined the safety group but refused praise that erased her earlier hesitation. Sure. The new process should not depend on one nurse being brave every shift, she said. Several weeks later, Marcus returned for follow-up wearing an ordinary brown jacket. The field coat remained folded at home. Sure. His steps were careful, and recovery was slower than he liked. At the entrance, a newly assigned patient advocate greeted him, confirmed his appointment, and asked whether transportation, prescriptions, sure, or follow-up costs created problems. She did not know his history. Across the waiting area, another uninsured patient was being helped to arrange a clinic visit that did not require advance payment. Sure. A nurse repeated the plan in plain language and asked whether it was actually possible. Elena was present for a scheduled review meeting and watched from a distance. No one moved faster because she had entered. Sure. No one asked about Marcus's unit patch because he was not wearing it. Marcus noticed her and nodded toward the advocate. "Better," he said. "Fixed?" Elena asked. He looked around the crowded emergency room. Sure. Where the wait was still long and tired staff were still making difficult choices. Not yet. Then he saw the other patient leave with a confirmed appointment instead of an unusable phone number. But better.